My name is Dr. Maura Kelly and I'm going to be lecturing in the Law of European Union. Just to give you an overview of the type of issues that we're going to be studying. So it is possible to break the course down into sections, and we'll just really do that for ease of teaching more than reflective of the actual exam paper. So we'll look at the legislative power of the EU, and within that then we look at the sources of EU law, and that not only is the type of legislation, but also we'll be looking at the competence issue, we'll be looking at the legislative process, and we look at these issues as specific topics in their own right, but we also need to look at them in the overall sort of theme that run through EU law in general, and if you want, the power struggle that often can exist between the EU institutions and the member states. And we'll find this, that on a lot of topics we'll have to look at them as self-contained topics, but then we'll have to draw them into some more theoretical issues that can arise on the FE1 EU paper. We'll also take a look then at some of the principles underpinning the legislative power, such as subsidiarity and proportionality, and the doctrine of supremacy. And we'll even take a look at how some of the main member states, such as Germany and France, have dealt with the doctrine of supremacy, and obviously we'll take a look at how Ireland has dealt with that as well. And again, in relation to proportionality, we'll be looking at in the context of the legislative side of the EU, in terms of the doctrine itself and what it entails, but then we'll come back to it again when we look at the fundamental rights aspect of EU law. Then an area that we will spend a good bit of time on is the enforcement process and for EU law, and we'll look at the infringement procedures whereby the EU can sanction member states who infringe EU law. We'll look at direct and indirect effect, whereby if a member state fails to implement a directive fully, then a citizen can get the full benefit of that directive before their national courts. We'll look at the interaction of direct and indirect effect as well, in terms of the types of situations that they both relate to. Then we look at the, if we want, fallback enforcement mechanism, which is the action for damages, whereby a member state that fails to transpose a directive, if injury has been caused, then they can be liable to pay damages to the injured party. Then on the other side, we'll take a look at the judicial power. And in the judicial power, we're going to take a look again at the two main sources of judicial power within the EU, and that's the preliminary reference procedure, which really is the European courts offering an interpretive assistance to the national courts in terms of their interpretation and their application of the EU law. And the principle of direct effect, I suppose, has given rise to this need for the national courts to get the assistance of the European law at times. Also, we'll take a look at the mechanisms by which you can challenge the legality of EU law, which is namely judicial review. And we'll also look how this supports some of the other principles that we would have looked at on the legislative side, such as conferred power, subsidiarity, proportionality. And we look and see how judicial review is, if you want, is a second attempt to ensure that those principles are respected and honoured by the member states. Then we'll take a look at the more recent aspects of the EU, which really are probably to do with societal issues. And this is a new side of the EU, particularly the involvement of fundamental rights and EU citizenship. So we'll look at fundamental right protection in terms of the pre and post charter position, and the charter then obviously took on greater significance when it became incorporated into the Lisbon Treaty. We'll also take a look at the basis of EU citizenship, and we'll have a look and see how the European courts are dealing with that in terms of them linking residence with movement and the requirement for people to have moved between member states. We'll also look at the family reunification aspect of citizenship, and this is a theme we'll then come back to later on when we're looking at free movement of workers. Then we'll look at the non-discrimination aspect of EU law, and that would have started off as sort of an equal pay concept. It moved to equal treatment, and now really what we have seen is a huge widening of the areas that are covered by discrimination. So this is quite a new and growing aspect of EU law, and one that does feature a good bit on the FE1 paper, so it is one that we will spend a bit of time on. Then I suppose one of the core aspects of EU law is the single market, and we will spend a significant proportion of the course looking at this. So we will look at the free movements and how they interact. And in particular, we'll be taking a look at how services interacts with establishment. We take a look at the free movement of goods. And there's three aspects to this. There's the quantitative restriction side, which really is a non-financial restriction. And then we look at customs duties and discriminatory taxes. And again, we need to look at each of these in isolation. And then we need to look at, as a whole, the impact that they have in supporting the single market and the free market. We'll also look at the free movement of workers, and we'll also go back and draw in on what we would have done at citizenship, and we'll also here deal with the recognition of professional qualifications. And this area comes up quite a lot as a problem question on the FE1 exam. Then we'll move into the whole area of competition law, mergers and state aid. And in competition law, we'll obviously be looking at Article 101 and 102. And some similarities between those two articles, and then the two very different situations that they both address. We'll also take a look at the mergers, concentrating a good bit on the merger regulation. And then we take a look at state aid, Article 106, in where public undertakings, the state grants them special rights. And that's obviously very topical at the moment with the Apple ruling that recently has been handed down. Then how do we prepare for the exam? So we'll have done all our lectures, we'll have thrashed out the issues, hopefully I will have answered any questions to you, for you. So what we'll take a look then at the type of style of lecture that we will have. So we'll have very much interactive lectures. We'll have an up-to-date reader-friendly manual. We'll have an interactive discussion of the main cases and the reasoning. And the manual has very much been done on the basis of main cases and then cases which act as further examples. And we'll obviously address the main cases in particular, and then you can use a selection of the example cases to fill out an answer if you were to get a whole answer on a particular topic. And obviously then we will deal with what you need to trim back if the topic is part of a question. We also need to look at the reasoning behind the law, because it is very important to get over that threshold and to secure a 50+ grade in EU law, that we actually are able to throw in some commentary around the cases. So, and what the basis of the law is and how that case has developed the law in that particular area. So we'll deal with the reasoning behind the law and the cases as well. We'll, as I have mentioned as I've gone through the topics, we'll also take a look at how a particular topic might interact with another topic, both in practice and also, more importantly, in the actual exam paper itself. And then I'll identify for you the pitfalls to avoid. Now, some of those pitfalls will be just issues relating to that particular area of law, and the other will be pitfalls to avoid in terms of comments from the examiner about common mistakes that are being made in the FE1 paper. In terms of the exam papers, which we will spend a good bit of time on those, we will tend to use them as ways of examining your understanding of the particular area and how that area tends to appear in the exam paper. And that's what we will spend a good bit of time doing. We'll also look at the essay versus problem style answers. Where we have topics that traditionally come up more as problem, we obviously will flag that issue, but we need to address then how you tailor that information for a problem style question as opposed to an essay question. Again, we look at the interlinking of topics within the questions on the paper and make sure that you understand how, if you address one particular topic, you need to make sure you cover a topic that often gets examined with it. And then we'll prepare for practical and theoretical style answers, because there tends to be a mix of that in the paper, but the paper is definitely leaning more towards the practical type of question. Then, the moment of truth. EU law is a tough subject. Both in terms of the content and the quality of the material, the quantity, I should say, of the material to be learnt. A lot of you will have done EU law already, and so hopefully the back will be broken in some of the topics, but obviously the FE1 exam is a very different exam to what you would have studied at college, and that's the one that I will be preparing you for. We need to look at the papers. There is a similar format to the papers, but the questions vary within the institutional and the judicial and the economic side, and we need to be careful of that. Answering the paper requires not only a knowledge of the law, but as important, an understanding of the law. And it'll be very important for us to work together to ensure that you have that understanding before you go into the exam. I mean, the only promise I can give you is we will get there, but will we still be friends? And what I mean about that is I'm very approachable as a lecturer. I'll answer any questions you have. If you don't understand something, I have absolutely no problem explaining it over and over again. But what I will be tough on is precision in your answer and no waffle, because that's what the examiner in the FE1 paper requires of you. And so I will be expecting that level of precision from you in the homework questions as we do interactive sessions around the questions, because if I don't expect that of you, I'm giving you a false sense of security, and that isn't something that's fair to you when you have this exam ahead of you. So I look forward to meeting you all in the EU law lectures, and as I said, we will get there.